I had just returned home with my father after another exhausting medical procedure. Over the past few months, he had been in and out of the hospital for various treatments, each one seeming to drain more of his strength. The car ride alone left him pale and trembling, barely able to hold himself up. My only goal was to get him inside the house so he could rest, get some relief from the endless pain, and just breathe easy for once. But as soon as I pulled into the driveway, I realized the universe, or more accurately, our HOA president, Barbara Whitmore, had other plans. I could already see her standing there, arms crossed, her trademark smug grin plastered on her face. As usual, she had the look of someone who was about to make my day even harder. That grin was like a warning sign, and an overwhelming sense of dread spread through me. I had no idea just how drastically our lives were about to spiral, all because of this relentless woman. But before we dive into the chaos, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you enjoy crazy stories like this, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Now let's get back to the mess that was about to unfold. We had barely stepped out of the car when Barbara made her move. I had just finished unlocking my father's wheelchair from the back seat, feeling my own shoulders ache with the stress of the day, when her sharp voice sliced through the air, cutting through the exhaustion like a knife. "That vehicle is a violation of HOA regulations," Barbara declared, sounding like a judge handing down a death sentence. I let out a sigh, trying my best to keep my tone calm and polite, even though I could feel the frustration building inside me. "Barbara, I've told you before, it's not a commercial vehicle. It's just a plain black sedan. My father is in a wheelchair, and we need easy access to the house. Please, can we handle this later?" But Barbara wasn't having it. She shook her head and pulled out her ever-present laminated HOA booklet, as though she were about to read from some holy text. "It sure looks commercial to me," she said with a smirk, flipping through the pages of her rulebook. "Vehicles used for business deliveries or any non-residential purpose are subject to immediate removal." My father, leaning heavily on the car door for support, stared at her with tired, confused eyes. He was drained from the procedure, barely able to stand, and the last thing he needed was a confrontation with this woman. I felt my patience starting to slip, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Barbara, you're making a mistake. This isn't some commercial vehicle, it's just a car. We just need to get my father inside so he can rest." But Barbara, as always, didn't care. The rules were all that mattered to her, and it seemed like today I was going to have to fight her once again. I could feel the frustration building up inside me as I tried to keep my composure. My father, already exhausted from his procedure, was barely able to hold himself up, and the last thing he needed was another confrontation. But as always, Barbara Whitmore was more concerned about the rules than about decency or common sense. "We literally just got home from his medical procedure," I said, my voice wavering between frustration and desperation. "Can we please handle this later?" Barbara tapped her finger on her laminated HOA booklet, her smug smile widening. "No can do. You're on the clock, and the tow truck's already on its way." My heart sank, and a cold wave of panic washed over me. She called the tow truck without even giving me a chance to move the car. I glanced at my father, his face falling, and I could see the confusion and weariness in his eyes. "Son, if it's going to cause problems, maybe I can move a few extra feet," he began weakly, but he could barely stand without his wheelchair. "No, Dad," I muttered under my breath. "This is nonsense. She has no right to do this." Barbara's timing, as usual, was impeccable. The distant rumble of a heavy engine reached my ears, making my stomach churn with dread. I turned just in time to see the massive tow truck slowly crawling down our street, its bright hazard lights flashing ominously like a warning sign of an incoming disaster. My father, still seated in the car, let out a weary sigh. "Not this again," he murmured. The tow truck jerked to a stop right in front of our driveway, and a burly driver hopped out. His expression was completely indifferent, as if this were just another job for him, another car to haul away. Clipboard in hand, he barely glanced at me before addressing Barbara as though she were his employer. "Which one, ma'am?" the driver asked. Barbara smirked, clearly enjoying every second of this power trip. With an exaggerated flourish, she raised her arm, pointing directly at my car. "That one, it's got to go." I stepped forward, jaw clenched in anger. "You're making a mistake," I said, my voice shaking. The tow truck driver finally gave me a quick glance, pen hovering over his form. You the owner? I took a deep breath, forcing my anger down. Technically, no. It belongs to my wife, but you really don't want to tow it. Barbara scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard I was surprised she didn't give herself whiplash. Barbara rolled her eyes so dramatically that I was surprised she didn't give herself whiplash. Oh, please, don't start with the excuses, she sneered. You're the one parking it, so it's fair game. She folded her arms, her eyes darting between me and the tow truck driver like she was daring me to challenge her. I exhaled slowly, feeling my patience slipping away. This woman was pushing me to my limit. Karen, I said, my voice steady despite the rising anger. Do you recall me telling you multiple times that my wife is an undercover officer? The tow truck driver frowned, clearly confused. Wait, what? Barbara's smug grin faltered just slightly, but she recovered quickly. She waved her hand dismissively. There are no cops in this neighborhood, she scoffed. That's ridiculous. You're lying to get around the bylaws. I took a deliberate step toward her, lowering my voice to a calm but menacing tone. Think very carefully about what you're saying right now, Karen, because you're about to cross a line you don't want to cross. Barbara scoffed again, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Oh, give me a break. If that's a police vehicle, where's the damn proof? I don't see any badges, no logos, no sirens. It's just a car. And in this neighborhood, the rules apply to everyone. The tow truck driver hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. It doesn't have markings, but if it's an official vehicle, I can't tow it. That's a serious legal issue. Barbara turned on him, her face twisting with rage. I told you, it's not a police car. He's just bluffing. Hook it up already. The driver frowned now, unsure of what to do. Listen, lady, if it's really government issued, I'm not getting sued because of your HOA drama. Karen's nostrils flared as she shouted, Oh my God, are you serious? This is exactly why we need stricter enforcement around here. People like him always think they're above the rules, always have some made-up excuse. I felt something inside me snap. My father, helpless in the car, was watching this woman try to sabotage our lives as if it were her personal mission. She didn't care about anyone but herself, and I couldn't stand it anymore. My father had already been through enough, and I wasn't going to let Karen make his last years miserable. I stepped forward, standing tall in front of Barbara. Enough is enough. I'm done playing nice. I couldn't let this slide anymore. My patience had run thin, and I knew I had to take control of the situation before Barbara went too far. I straightened my shoulders and my voice dropped into a deadly calm. Karen, I swear, if you so much as touch that tow truck cable, you're going to regret it. Her mouth opened, then quickly shut. For the first time, she looked genuinely nervous. The shift in her demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. The tow truck driver eyed both of us, clearly uncertain about what was happening. Look, the driver said, his tone growing impatient. I don't have time for this. Either you pay the fee for my time, or I'm out of here. Barbara nearly choked. I'm not paying for this, she spat, her voice seething with anger. And then, like a well-timed miracle, the sound of my wife's personal car rolling into the driveway interrupted the tension. She stepped out of the car, looking as calm and collected as ever. Sunglasses on, unreadable expression on her face, but the air around her shifted. Everyone in the driveway could feel it, a sudden change, as though the winds of fortune had just changed direction. Barbara immediately pounced, pointing a finger with her usual arrogance. Oh, look who finally decided to show up, she sneered. I was just telling your husband here that he's breaking HOA rules and lying through his teeth. My wife didn't react immediately, her gaze unwavering. Excuse me? She asked simply, her voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. Barbara let out a sharp, mocking laugh, turning to the tow truck driver like she had an audience. He's been standing here telling me you're some kind of police officer. Can you believe that? She then turned back to my wife, her tone dripping with condescension. Let me guess, now you're going to claim you're some kind of FBI agent too? I felt my stomach tighten. Karen was digging herself deeper and she had no idea what was coming. Listen, sweetheart, Karen continued, her voice oozing with disdain. You might want to tell your husband to be careful because I could report both of you for impersonating law enforcement. She smirked. That's a felony, you know. A slow, tense silence spread between us. Karen's smugness lasted exactly 3 seconds before my wife calmly reached into her back pocket as though she'd been waiting for this moment. She pulled out a small leather wallet, flipped it open, and revealed her police badge. The metal gleamed under the afternoon sun, and Karen's face drained of all color. Barbara's face drained of all color as the reality of the situation finally sank in. The tow truck driver stiffened, his gaze flicking between Karen and my wife, who stood with an expression that could freeze anyone in their tracks. A few neighbors who had gathered to watch let out low gasps, and whispers began to ripple through the crowd. I crossed my arms, keeping my gaze fixed on Barbara. "Still think we're lying, Karen?" Barbara's face turned a sickly shade of white. She was no longer in control, and the shift was unmistakable. The neighbors who had been intimidated by her for years were now watching with keen interest. Some whispered among themselves, others smirked, but no one seemed surprised. They all knew what Karen had been doing to the neighborhood for years. Now that she was finally on the losing end, they were savoring the moment. The tow truck driver, clipboard still in hand, let out a sharp sigh, rubbing his temples in frustration. "All right, that's it. Someone's paying me," he demanded, his patience clearly wearing thin, "or I'm filing a claim." Karen, still clinging to her rulebook as if it were her lifeline, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Oh no, I'm not paying for this," she sneered. "I shouldn't have to pay for this. This isn't my problem." The driver gave her an unimpressed look, the kind of look you give when you've had enough of someone's nonsense. "Ma'am, you called for the tow. That means you pay the call-out fee. That's how this works." Karen's mouth twisted into a scowl, her fury now fully unleashed. "No, I called for a tow because of an HOA violation. I was enforcing the rules. I'm not the one at fault here." She threw her hands up dramatically as if trying to rally the crowd behind her. "You all heard him admit it. That's not his car. It's his wife's, and she's not even home. He's been lying this entire time, and now you expect me to pay?" A few neighbors exchanged knowing glances, but no one was buying her act. The driver didn't flinch. He tapped his clipboard and said, "Yeah, lady, I don't care about your HOA drama. I care about getting paid." Karen stiffened, her eyes darting around as she tried to think of a way out. Then, in a desperate attempt to shift the blame, she turned back to the driver. "Listen, I have a better idea. Just file the charge to his account." She jabbed a finger at me. "He's the one breaking the rules, so he should be the one to pay." The tow truck driver let out a short laugh of disbelief. "That's not how this works, lady." His patience was clearly running thin, and Karen's increasingly desperate antics were doing nothing but adding fuel to the fire. Karen's face turned a deep shade of red, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I will not pay this," she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. "You can't make me." The driver shrugged nonchalantly, flipping a page on his clipboard. "Cool, I'll just send it to collections then. Enjoy dealing with that." At the mention of collections, Karen visibly flinched. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, struggling for words. Her usual arrogance seemed to deflate, at least for a moment. Then, without warning, she turned on me, seething with anger. "This is your fault. You and your pathetic lies. If you had just followed the rules, this never would have happened." I took a step forward, ready to respond, but my wife placed a calm hand on my arm. She tilted her head toward Karen, a slight smirk playing on her lips. "You called him, Karen. You pay." Karen let out a strangled noise, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. For a moment, I honestly thought she might explode from the pressure. But then, with a furious growl, she ripped open her purse, snatched out her credit card, and practically threw it at the tow truck driver. "Take it," she spat. "I hope you're all happy now." The driver swiped her card, completely unfazed by her tantrum. "Pleasure doing business with you." A few of the neighbors who had gathered to watch quietly cheered. Mrs. Santiago, who had always been one of Karen's most vocal critics, shook her head and muttered, "About time Karen faced real consequences." Humiliated, Karen turned her fury on me. "You'll regret this," she hissed, her voice shaky but dripping with hatred. "I'm the president of this HOA, and I'll see to it that you pay for making a fool of me." With that, she stomped away, the crowd parting to let her pass. My father, who had witnessed the entire showdown from the passenger seat, was pale and trembling. "Are we safe?" he asked, his voice weak. I opened the car door to help him out, forcing a reassuring smile. "We're fine, Dad. Let's get you inside. Karen's all talk. She won't try that again." But I was wrong. Karen was the kind of person who would push any limit, break any rule, and ignore any shred of decency just to get what she wanted. And I knew deep down, this wouldn't be the last time she tried to make our lives miserable. I had no idea what Barbara Whitmore was planning next, but I knew she was the type of person who would push any boundary, disregard any shred of human decency, just to win. Within 48 hours, the first of many violation letters appeared on my doorstep. It was like a nasty daily subscription that wouldn't stop, each one claiming a new, increasingly absurd offense. The first letter was about my grass height. Apparently, my lawn was 0.7 inches taller than the exact HOA standard. Then came another letter about the wheelchair ramp by our front entrance, calling it unauthorized construction. The letter demanded that I tear it down or face hefty fines. The third violation was about my mailbox, which Barbara claimed had faded paint that didn't meet the aesthetic guidelines of the community. I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through the pile of letters, each one more ridiculous than the last. My father, noticing my frustration, set aside his walker and sank into a chair beside me. His health had been steadily declining, and this constant barrage of fines was taking a toll on both of us. "All because of that car fiasco, right?" he asked softly, his voice tinged with guilt. "I feel like I'm to blame. You did it for me, so I'd be closer to the house." I reached over and gripped his hand, trying to reassure him. "Dad, none of this is your fault. Karen would have found some excuse anyway. She's punishing me because I embarrassed her in front of the neighbors." He sighed, a mix of guilt and defeat clouding his eyes. His health was fragile, heart issues, nerve pain, and mobility challenges. The last thing he needed was the stress of a full-blown HOA war. "Maybe I should stay in my room more, out of her sight," he murmured, half joking, half serious. My chest tightened as I felt the weight of his words. "No way, Dad. This is our home. You are not a prisoner here." I could see him trying to force a reassuring nod, but it was clear that Karen's constant harassment was affecting his spirit. That was when I vowed to dig deeper into her methods, not just for me, but for the sake of my father and the other neighbors who had suffered under her regime. Things escalated quickly. One afternoon, I was helping my dad onto the porch so he could sit outside for some fresh air. He rarely left the house except for hospital appointments, and the ramp was essential for him to get in and out safely. It was crucial for my father to roll in and out of the house safely, especially after his latest medical setback. As we stepped outside, I felt a slight sense of relief, just the two of us, in the fresh air. But before I could get my father settled on the porch, Karen appeared. She was standing on the sidewalk, arms crossed, her eyes as cold as ever. "You're still using that unapproved ramp?" she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I sent you a notice. Did you not see it?" I gritted my teeth, my patience worn thin. "My father needs this ramp. He's not physically able to climb steps. You know that." She shrugged dismissively, clearly unconcerned with any of my father's struggles. "HOA standards exist for a reason," she retorted. "Your ramp is an eyesore and violates the uniformity rule. I can fine you daily until it's removed." My father's knuckles turned white as he gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his face a mix of frustration and exhaustion. "Ma'am, please. This ramp is the only reason I can leave the house. I'm a disabled veteran. Are you saying I have no place here?" Karen lifted an eyebrow, looking bored, as if she couldn't be bothered to care. "If you need that many accommodations, maybe you picked the wrong neighborhood." I felt a surge of rage so strong it nearly brought tears to my eyes. My father had served this country, sacrificed so much for people like Karen, and now she had the audacity to imply that he was a nuisance? I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, my wife stepped out from behind us, her presence commanding attention. "Karen, that's enough," she said firmly, her arms folded over her chest. "You're infringing on ADA protections. Keep pushing, and you'll find yourself in serious legal trouble." Karen rolled her eyes and pivoted on her heel. "We'll see about that," she snapped. "I have every right to keep this community up to standard. Your father's situation doesn't exempt him from the rules." Without another word, Karen stalked off, leaving the three of us shaken. My father's shoulders slumped, a defeated sigh escaping him. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice heavy with guilt. "I never thought I'd be in the way." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, Dad, you're not in the way. She is." Word of Karen's cruelty spread quickly through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within days, I was approached by several neighbors, some whispering about similarly outrageous fines they had received, while others had been bullied into paying fees for minor infractions. The stories from the neighbors kept piling up, and each one painted a clearer picture of Barbara Whitmore's reign of terror over the community. One single mother tearfully recounted how Karen had demanded she move her child's small basketball hoop for community safety reasons. When the mother refused, Barbara threatened to report her to Child Protective Services. My father, listening to these stories, seemed both horrified and oddly encouraged. He muttered under his breath, "So it's not just us. She's been at this for a long time." I nodded, my mind racing. That means we have a solid case if we band together. The more I thought about it, the more it seemed like the whole neighborhood had suffered under her petty tyranny. I began compiling an ever-growing list of Karen's transgressions: excessive fines for trivial matters, wrong paint shades on houses, minor noise complaints about children playing, and even fraudulent claims to the tow company, like the time she falsely reported my wife's unmarked car as a commercial vehicle. Then there was the harassment over the wheelchair ramp aimed directly at a disabled man. My father had been directly affected, and I had seen firsthand the toll it was taking on his health and spirit. My wife helped me organize these documents into neat folders, both paper and digital. She even included references to the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, and fair housing guidelines. With enough evidence, she said, the city's housing authority, or even a private attorney, can shut her down. Dad mustered a small smile, though it was weighed down by the sadness in his eyes. "I hope so," he said. "I'd like to leave the house without feeling like a criminal for existing." Despite all the progress, Karen refused to back off. A week later, while Dad and I were inside discussing his next medical appointment, we heard the rumble of another tow truck. My chest constricted with dread. I had a gut feeling it was for my wife's unmarked vehicle again. We rushed outside, my father in his wheelchair, and me practically sprinting to the driveway. The driver was already hooking up the same black sedan that had been targeted before. Karen stood by, arms folded, her usual smug expression in place. "I warned you," she said coolly. "Since you insist on breaking the bylaws, I'm taking action." I practically shouted in disbelief, "You know that's a police car, right? This is the second time you've tried to pull this stunt." Karen shrugged with exaggerated innocence, her eyes wide as if she were completely unaware of what was happening. "It has no visible markings," she said, her voice dripping with feigned sincerity. "Looks commercial to me." My father, still seated in his wheelchair, cleared his throat, trying to gather his strength. "Karen, you're—" But he broke off, overwhelmed by the tension. The stress was too much for him to handle, and I could see the strain on his face. Thankfully, just at that moment, my wife arrived, her calm demeanor immediately shifting the dynamic. She was accompanied by a local officer who had responded to a neighbor's call. The officer took one look at the tow truck and then turned his gaze on Karen, his expression hardening. "Is this the same car you tried to tow last week?" he demanded, his voice firm. Karen lifted her chin defiantly, trying to stand her ground. "I told you, the bylaws," she started, but the officer held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Ma'am," the officer said, his voice clear and authoritative, "local statutes and state law override your HOA rules. You can't keep calling the tow for a legitimate, legally parked vehicle, especially if it's law enforcement property." The tow truck driver shook his head, clearly frustrated. "I'm not losing my job over this," he muttered. "I didn't know she'd pulled this stunt before." Karen's face twisted in frustration as she realized she had cornered herself. The neighbors, who had gathered once again to witness the scene, were openly filming. It was public humiliation on a scale that made her previous fiasco seem mild. "This is harassment. I'm the one being harassed," she screeched, but no one seemed to buy it. The officer calmly repeated, "Ma'am, I'm warning you. Keep this up and you'll face charges for harassment or obstruction." Karen shot me a venomous glare before she stormed off without another word. Her attempt to dominate the situation had failed, and she knew it. It turned out that Karen's repeated attempts to tow an unmarked police vehicle had triggered the city's housing department. Within days, inspectors and local officials began poking around our neighborhood, asking detailed questions about Karen's actions as HOA president. I started hearing rumors that she had questionable financial records and might have been embezzling HOA funds for years. Neighbors began forwarding me screenshots of maintenance fees that never seemed to match the actual work done. Others spoke of hush-hush cash payments that Karen had demanded for minor infractions. It became increasingly clear that Barbara Whitmore had a personal slush fund built from the mysterious payments she demanded for trivial infractions. My dad, with a renewed sense of purpose, helped me piece together all the clues. We spent days gathering witness statements, taking photos of the ramp, collecting every violation letter, and compiling receipts from neighbors who had been forced to pay Karen under the table. "You know," Dad said quietly one evening, "I never wanted to be in the middle of a war, but if it stops her from hurting others, maybe this was meant to happen." He paused, looking at the growing pile of evidence. His voice grew firmer. "She's taken advantage of everyone in this neighborhood for too long. It's time to stop her." I gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We're close to the finish line, Dad. She's about to face the music." The meltdown came sooner than I expected. One sunny afternoon, my dad and I were sitting on the porch, enjoying a rare moment of calm. We watched as two unmarked sedans parked near Barbara's house. A group of officials in suits got out, followed by a couple of uniformed officers. They marched right up to her front door, and for a moment, everything seemed still. We couldn't hear the exact conversation, but it didn't take long for Karen's shrill voice to cut through the quiet suburban air. She yelled something about unlawful intrusion, waving her arms frantically, and then tried to slam the door. One of the officers wedged his foot in the door, stopping her from closing it. Neighbors started to emerge from their houses, drawn by the spectacle. My wife joined us on the porch, arms folded across her chest, and we all watched from a distance. "Is that an arrest warrant they're showing her?" she murmured, her voice filled with a quiet sense of anticipation. Dad's eyes flickered between shock and relief. "If it is, well, she certainly earned it." Suddenly, Karen stumbled backward, her face draining of color, as one of the officials stepped inside her home. Another officer began speaking into a radio. It looked like they were searching for financial records, and Karen was powerless to stop them. She tried to argue, her voice growing more frantic with every passing second. But the more she railed, the clearer it became. She had no legal ground to stand on. After Karen Whitmore was investigated and her corrupt actions exposed, the entire neighborhood was relieved to see justice finally served. The main character and his father had not only stood up for themselves, but also for their neighbors who had been harassed and taken advantage of by Karen for years. As officials dug deeper into her financial records and the violations she'd committed, the community began to breathe easier, knowing that Karen's reign of fear was coming to an end. The main character and his father felt a renewed sense of hope, proud that they had fought back against the injustice. Though there would likely be more challenges ahead, they knew they had made the right choice by standing up for what was right. The experience brought the neighborhood closer, and Karen's power over them had been permanently broken. The story of Karen Whitmore and the struggle that the main character and his father endured teaches us several important lessons about resilience, justice, and the power of standing up for what's right. First, it reminds us that no matter how powerful or authoritative someone might seem, no one is above the law or decency. Karen's actions, driven by her need for control and disregard for others' well-being, were eventually uncovered, showing that even the most relentless bullies can be brought down when truth and integrity are on your side. The story also highlights the strength of community. When the main character gathered evidence and connected with his neighbors, they were able to band together to take down a common enemy. It shows the importance of unity in the face of adversity and that standing together can amplify the fight for justice. Another key lesson is about perseverance, even when the fight seems overwhelming. Despite Karen's persistent harassment, the main character never backed down and continued to push for what was right, even when his father, weakened by illness, felt defeated. Finally, the story teaches us the importance of standing up for others. The main character not only fought for himself and his father, but also for the entire neighborhood, ensuring that others no longer had to suffer in silence. This story encourages us to always speak up against injustice, support those in need, and work toward creating a fairer and more compassionate community.